The world is watching as the United States chooses its president. With political divisions, the pandemic, race issues, and the economy, many consider this one of the country's most critical votes. After the first day of counting, there is still no clear winner. So how will all of this play out? Will this election heal the nation's divides? And what lies ahead for relations with China? To discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by Einar Tangen, current affairs commentator. We also have with us from Washington, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, professor of politics at East China Normal University, Tom McGregor, author of U.S. versus China, From Trade Wars to Reciprocal Deal in Beijing, and Dr. Xue Qin, a researcher at the Shanghai Institutes for International Studies in Shanghai. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Jonathan Betts. So this has turned into a very close race. Still no winner yet between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but where things sit now, Einar, who do you think is in a better position?
Well, as soon as people start getting up and starting to recount the votes, things. So let's break it down. There's two real phases that we're talking about. There's the actual vote counting itself, and then there's the probable lawsuits that are going to follow. There's very, very close races. Obviously, the battleground states are in play. They're very, very close. They're going to be litigated by one side or another.
Do you expect that, Joseph? Do you think this could lead to litigation in some of these battleground states, especially considering some of the margins here that we're seeing are very much in favor of Donald Trump?
You know, I think what we can say is that Trump has outperformed expectations. Biden currently, at the last check I saw about a half hour ago, is 2.3 million votes ahead. We're at risk for repeating 2016, where Hillary won the popular vote, but Trump won the Electoral College. I think even in the case of Electoral College, it's still in play. And to be honest, I think that the vote counts at this point, the ones that we're likely to see from the absentee and mail-in votes, are likely to favor Biden. So it may be closer than it appears.
I mean, right now it appears to be very close. So, Tom, help us understand what happened, because a lot of polls leading into this showed Biden with a favorable lead. We mentioned 2016. The same thing happened with Hillary Clinton. A lot of the pollsters said, hey, we learned our lesson from 4 years ago, but now it does seem that history is repeating itself. What's happening?
Very, very suspicious. I was certainly not happy to see what happened. It looked like Trump was winning. He was starting to win big. And then suddenly they stopped counting the vote. I find that very troublesome. This is the first time ever in U.S. election history when a candidate is winning, he's poised to capture the big win and get reelected, and suddenly they stop the vote. And this happens to be in states that are considered to be very pro-Democrat Party states. Very questionable actions by some of the elections officials, and they deserve terrible rebuke for their actions. They should have just kept counting until the vote was done.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about? Because, I mean, the votes, they're still counting the votes, and in fact,
no, they
at
stopped.
This point, Trump looks like he's leading a lot of these battleground states.
No, Trump was leading. Trump was leading. He was leading by 700,000 in Pennsylvania. He was leading by 100,000 in Georgia. He was leading by another 70,000 in North Carolina. In Wisconsin, it was 120,000. Michigan, it was 300,000. These are remarkable leads. I'm not sure where you're getting you're doing your math.
I mean, the numbers are out there. We're going to let that.
Why do you find this funny? I mean, there was a significant lead.
Right. Okay. We're going to let that go. Let's move on. Because Xue Qin, I do want to bring you into this conversation here. I mean, what are the biggest takeaways you think from this election, from what we're seeing so far?
Actually, there are 6 to 7 states that's as a battlefield. And it seems to me that Biden is taking the lead in Nevada and Wisconsin. But still, there are other 4 states that Donald Trump taking the lead. But I look at Pennsylvania could be a very problematic. It could be a kind of a repetition to like 2000 between Al Gore and George W. Bush. So there's still mail-in votes coming until November the 6th. But as the gentleman said, that Donald Trump has ordered or proclaimed the stop counting the votes. and also going to the Supreme Courts. It's a kind of an initiation of a kind of a possible constitutional crisis. And also his supporters might go to the streets. So I also look forward to a kind of trouble coming.
Well, let's
Jonathan.
let's play the soundbite from President Trump. Hours after the polls closed, he claimed an early victory, getting a lot of heat for that, repeating claims of election fraud during his speech to supporters at the White House. So take a listen to this.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop.
So, Tom, I'm going to get the reaction from you because I know you're a Trump supporter here. Help me understand what's going on here, because a lot of people, I mean, there's a lot of anger at the claims of voter fraud since there's not a lot of evidence to back that up.
Yeah, we were very concerned about that. Many Republicans were really concerned about the voter fraud.
But
So
Tom,
go ahead.
what I'm more interested in is, why is he coming out with this narrative, considering a lot of people are saying, you know, Trump might be actually kind of in a good position here. I mean, he's poised to win several critical swing states.
Fraud is fraud. You should never endorse fraud. It's illegal. People who are doing fraud, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they deserve to be punished, they deserve to be penalized for it, and they deserve to go to prison for it. The people who are instigating this type of fraud should be punished, and the law says that it's punishable up to 5 years in a federal prison. They deserve to go there.
Einar, I want your reaction, because there is no evidence of any widespread fraud in this election.
Well, I mean, Tom is an ardent supporter, and that's his right. But I think it's very important not to be throwing around this fraud claim until you actually have some evidence of fraud. You know, it was Donald Trump who said it's time to stop, counting, and all this type of thing, except in states where he thought it would be better for him to start, for his campaign if they continue to, and Arizona being one of those. So at this point, we don't have any fraud. There is going to be lawsuits. Obviously, motions are running very, very high on both sides. And it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be long and drawn out. And hopefully, at the end of it, there will be a president who can pull us together.
We played this Trump soundbite, so I also want to play Joe Biden, because he took a very different and measured approach, urging patience from his supporters. He spoke in Delaware and said he is on track to victory. So listen to this.
It's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election. That's the decision of the American people. But I'm optimistic about this outcome. And I want to thank every one of you who came out and voted in this election.
So, Joseph, very, very different approaches here from two very, very different men. I mean, what do you think when you see the turnout, when you see the numbers that are coming in? What does it say about the status of American politics at this hour?
Well, I think what we saw was that Trump had pursued a number of strategies or tactics going into this election where his supporters were unafraid to go to the polls. And their strategy was in the traditional mobilization, what we call ground game, get out the vote. And so, a lot of the numbers that we're seeing right now are precisely those people that went and voted in these machines, that do the tallies. And we're seeing a very high turnout at this point, higher than the last election. Some reports have it the highest in 100 years, but I don't think that's the case. We've seen, at least in certain key counties where we have a lot of data right now, we've seen higher in the last 30 years at least. So I think what we are surprised is that in the case of Florida, for example, Latinos appear to be supporting Trump in higher expected margins. But again, that may not be so surprising given the fact that a lot of the Latinos in Florida are people of Cuban descent and had favored Republicans traditionally anyway.
But that is kind of a surprise, isn't it, Einar? I mean, a lot of people were saying, in fact, some of the polls showed Biden having a slight edge before the election here. Florida went to Trump pretty firmly.
Well, I think we can pretty much say that the polls are not the best guidelines at this point. It was actually kind of shocking to a lot of people just how far off they were. And I think this is very important. America is in a very emotional position. You have people on both sides who are, saying that if the other guy wins, I'm afraid for what's going to happen. At this point, it's necessary to have a measured process, and you're seeing that around the country. Even in these battleground states, there's no rush. They're being very deliberate. They're making sure everything is documented. They know that there's going to be a lawsuit, and they're preparing for it.
Shua Chin, this election has been labeled one of the most important in American history. So many divisive issues here. From your perspective, do you think this is one of the country's most pivotal elections?
I should say it could be a kind of one of the most important election in American history. Actually, we've seen in American history there's a bumping up and down of the people's emotions and also the division of the country. Like 1824, Andrew Jackson, 1860, Abraham Lincoln, and also 1932, Franklin Roosevelt, and 1960, between Richard Nixon and JFK. These are all the America at the crossroads. Now this is also one of the most important elections, and it might change the trajectory of the future and also the history of American.
In which ways do you think it could change the trajectory of the country?
Important, but not the. I believe that with Donald Trump for 8 years in the White House, it could be a kind of guarantee of the division of the country in the next 4 years. This is also as an observer from the Chinese side to looking at the country is keeping divided. President Trump does not care. The other half of the American people, he just wants to, manipulate the emotions of the other half, which is his supporters. So I never seen a presidential candidate when he's taking the lead and calling it a fraud, which means possibly means that the whole election could be a fraud. His lead is also a fraud. So with this kind of division, we will see a guarantee of the future chaotic bureaucratic system and Washington D.C. and also people getting more and more concerned and anxious for the other half who does not support Donald Trump.
I mean, that is a good point, Tom.
How this will change in the American history in the future.
Indeed, Tom. And, that is a very good point. I mean, when you look at it, no matter who wins here, Biden or Trump, both have a lot of supporters. The vote is very, very close. Tom, what would you like to see happen to try to heal some of these divisions we're seeing in the United States right now?
I'd like for the Democrats to calm down their anger and their hatred towards Republicans. I see it on the social media. I deal with it all the time. The anger, the outrage, it's constant name calling. Oh, you're a Republican, you're a racist, oh, you're a bad guy. The fact is if the Democrats are throwing everything and the kitchen
can Republicans do anything, Tom, to try to ease that
we
anger?
have to respond. What do you think? Should we be wimps? Should we say, oh, thank you for kicking me? That's outrageous. That's why we love Trump, because he is supporting us. He is defending us. He is defending the forgotten man and woman.
All right, we're going to take a break here. You're watching Dialogue. More after this short break.
Hello and welcome to our CGTN TV forum.
Hello. Hello to you from Tokyo.
The head of the three countries must meet as soon as possible.
The negotiations started in November 2012.
At this moment, to close one eye in order to work together.
Where we are now as a world.
Multilateral system, including the United Nations, is going through a very difficult time.
It is now high time to build on the trilateral progress.
So let's pick up on that conversation. So I want to get back to the divisions, Einar, in this country, in the United States. A lot of anger, a lot of people furious, a lot of people are going to be upset with the results for sure. What do you think needs to happen to try to heal some of these divisions?
Well, first, I mean, I'll do deference to Tom. I mean, you're complaining about being vilified, and then you vilify the Democrats because you say they started it first. I don't think that's the adult way of handling this. The United States is, wedded to its principles of democracy. It has to adhere to them, and part of that is being willing to not vote one issue. It has to be something where I can balance the issues that are important to me, but also what are important to the country. And you're not seeing a lot of that coming forward. I think Joe Biden was trying to get that point across. I don't know if he necessarily did, but the anger is palpable.
It may not have resonated. So, Joseph, let me ask you here, if Trump does get a second term here, do you think that we might see a change in style, a change in tactic from the president, considering he won't have to worry about re-election? Some think that maybe, perhaps, are hopeful, we could see a more socially aware President Trump. Possible?
I think that we should all be optimistic and hope that someone's better nature reveals itself. But I don't think we're anywhere near that point yet. Certainly we're going to see a lot more friction in the coming days, and it's going to make the situation worse. To be honest with you, I think what you've seen from Trump is what you're going to get. I think, I wrote about a couple of days ago the failures of the Trump administration with respect to the pandemic, and I was immediately trolled in social media by Republicans asking me which universe I lived in. This idea that everything is fine, it's okay, and here we are. I think that what we've seen is literally his style and his capacity. And even in these rare moments where he's shown a bit of humanity, it's not really part of his style either in business or in politics. And I think above all, what we're seeing in what we might describe as this emergence of what might be called pandemic capitalism are some of the worst aspects of social, economic, and political Darwinism. And this is not simply a Trump and Biden issue. These are based on deep systemic crises that have been mounting for decades and that are coming to a head at a moment where we have global climate change as well as a pandemic, as well as a rising China,
right.
And the U.S. is really struggling to respond.
So let's talk about China here. Obviously a huge focus for President Trump. Relations have completely become unraveled between China and the U.S. over the last 4 years. Shua Chin, let me ask you, who do you think the Chinese leadership would prefer to see in the White House, Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
Actually, as I said yesterday, that there's no kind of preference among the Chinese leadership on which one will be the next president. The Chinese leadership will be prepared to work with the either presidents, and the Chinese has been also counting the goods and the bads for the two candidates.
So, I mean, Einar, I want you to jump in on this here.
Okay.
Do you think that Joe Biden might lead to a reset in relations with China?
A mini reset, but remember, both Trump and Biden are American exceptionalists. They really do believe that the American system of democratic capitalism is really the only path forward, and that it's the United States' duty to try to push that around the world. And you've seen it around the world, regime change and things like this. They've made it, abundantly clear that that would be the goal. Now, Biden would come at it differently. He would try to, as he has said, he's going to try to form a coalition of democratic capitalist countries and try to pressure China into accepting this kind of things. It's probably not going to work because China's been extremely successful, whereas the results in the last 30 years on the democratic capitalist side have been rather mixed. And I mean by that the leadership that you would expect and need hasn't shown up, and also on the capitalist side, the market efficiency isn't there. You're seeing a lot of monopolies and oligopolies.
So, Tom, do you think that Trump will keep up the pressure on China if he gets reelected, or will he move on to other issues?
Probably move on to other issues, but China will be a major role. The U.S. has to focus on its economic rebound. Where Trump is very strong is on economic issues, and if Trump sees an advantage of Chinese companies investing in America, opening up new factories in America, and he sees the win-win benefits, he's going to be more supportive of China. I think the problem is with Trump is that he is getting bad advice, and it's coming from U.S. Secretary of State Michael Pompeo. He's a disaster. He's awful. And the thing is I think if Trump more focuses on economic issues, he can find ways to improve relations with a fantastic U.S.-China trade agreement down the road.
So, I mean, Joseph, that's a good point because, you know, Trump really seems to be focused on economic issues here, especially when it comes to China. Do you see that possibly happening, that maybe they could see a reset, or has the bridge been burned? Is it too late? Is the China leadership going to be so irritated and over working with President Trump that it'd be hard to regain ground?
Well, I agree with Tom that Mike Pompeo is a disaster, but I suspect that Pompeo is really just a faithful foot soldier for Trump's own tendencies towards China, which I suspect run much deeper than the economy. I think they have to do with strategic repositioning. I think they're driven substantially by the Pentagon. But, you know, that's just my read of the situation. To be honest with you, I haven't understood why so many voters saw Biden as being more likely to deal effectively with the pandemic, whereas Trump is being hailed for his economic capacity. I think the economy under Trump has been a house of cards. It's been fueled by very, very friendly Fed policies. It's been fueled by incredible overspending in terms of fiscal policies, tax breaks that can't be afforded. To be honest with you, I think that what we've seen is something that is going to fall apart significantly, even given the tremendous growth that we've seen in the last month. It's not being shared equitably across the country. We're setting ourselves up for a crisis to come,
Tom,
certainly in the next year.
Tom, your quick response to that, because I see you shaking your head over there.
Yeah, obviously, because the fact is you had a great stock market, you had a booming jobs market, you had the lowest unemployment rate and the longest time, and that includes with African Americans and Latinos, and that's why Trump had a lot of support from them. The fact is the economy was booming until the coronavirus happened.
I mean, Einar, that's hard to argue with.
No, yes, it is. I would say that his handling of it was less than perfect.
The virus, the pandemic.
Absolutely. If he had done what China had done and shut things down for 3 months, the U.S. economy would be back and rolling at this point. He didn't have the
European countries did that, and they are back where they started.
Yeah, but they didn't actually do the test and trace and treat option in there. It's not just shutting down. It's shutting down to control it and then putting in place the protocols so that you can literally track everybody. China has been successful. There's no question about that. Let's see what happens on the second wave, but it seems like they're able to do that. If that is the case, I don't know why Trump wasn't following what China was doing. It's not a question of China, it's just a question of what model you follow in order to help your people.
But Joseph, looking at the election here, I mean, do you feel like this was really about the virus, or do you think some of the other issues we've addressed overlapped that?
I think it's about a lot of issues. I think the virus in some ways has helped Trump and hurt Trump. I think maybe it might have suppressed some of the turnout, even though we see high turnout. I think it's, you know, the people who are most vulnerable to the virus, minorities, older people, are people who may well have supported Biden. You know, to be honest with you, I think we're just going to have to wait and see.
So, Einar, let's talk about, you know, President Trump winning re-election possibly here, what this would mean for the global order. He clearly is against these global bodies, the WTO, the World Health Organization, the United Nations. What would that mean for this?
Well, if he continues on, I mean, it's going to be more onslaughts. He has a visceral response to any kind of power that's above his own. And whether if it's the media, he attacks it. Whether it's a global organization, he undermines it. And we've seen this consistently. I mean, it's not just something that I'm criticizing him for. It's part of his nature.
He's proud of that.
Well, yes, he sees himself as a hunter, as somebody who's going out there and, you know, literally seizing things and things like this. He really sees himself as this kind of power guy. And you can see it in the way that he interacts with international leaders, whether it's Putin or anything. He really sees himself as one of the apex predators on the planet, and that the United States is, kind of the gang he has behind them, and he's able to, in essence, force a lot of countries. Look what they've done with the military budgets in Japan and South Korea. They say, you got to pay. And this never had come up with under anybody else in terms of the billions that he was asking for.
But again, the question, is the damage already been done if Biden does win? Can he pull the United States back into these organizations, or have the bridges been burned?
No, I don't. I mean, talking about with China, yes, the bridges have been burned.
There's also been bridges burned with Europe and other.
Well, yeah, let's say Canadians might have a second thought about things, and so Mexico. But it's not forever. I mean, basically, what Biden's going to do is say the last 4 years were, a mistake. This person undid everything, all the work that Obama and I did, and we now need to have a reset with the world. And he's already clearly indicated that he's going to do that. He's going to refund WTO. He's going to, WHO. He's going to look at WTO. Remember, it's a useless organization at this point simply because the U.S. has not acquiesced to having more judges. They have to give the okay, otherwise there are no judges, and therefore no enforcement. You start looking at the Paris Climate Accord. That's going to be things. So yes, there are pathways back across these bridges. The question is, has trust been kind of destroyed? Because the same elements are still there. The people who voted for Trump are not going away. And as we see by this election, they feel impassioned about this. There will be a new champion, whether it's Trump or somebody else. Pompeo is waiting in the wings to take on the mantle in 2024. He's going to use that anger. So a lot of people in Europe and around the world are going to be looking very, very carefully at this. How do you trust an unreliable partner? And that becomes one of the issues.
The next 4 years, Biden or Trump, how do they look for the United States and for the world?
I think Biden. Most of the international order would prefer Biden, just because he said he's going to commit it to a multilateral world. Trump has his own style and has basically antagonized everyone he's dealt with, except for a few countries.
All right, we'll leave it there. Our thanks to Einar Tangen, current affairs commentator, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, professor of politics, East China Normal University, Tom McGregor, author, U.S. versus China, From Trade Wars to Reciprocal Deal in Beijing, and Dr. Shuo Chen, researcher at the Shanghai Institutes for International Studies in Shanghai. Thank you all for being on the show with us tonight. Critical election, critical moment in history, still unclear who's going to lead the United States. We'll stay on top of it, but that is all the time we have for dialogue. Thanks so much for watching. Keep it here. Much more ahead on CGTN.
I'm always caught up in the constant noise between America and China. When the world is off balance because the two biggest powers are not seeing eye to eye. We went to their contact points. Are American businesses still running in China? How do American institutions and their Chinese partners think about the past and their future? And what does it mean for the world?